The winter wind was howling outside the tall windows of the old music academy, but inside, the atmosphere was thick and warm. It was the kind of warmth that comes from too many people packed into a room. It's mixed with the smell of expensive perfume, floor wax, and old velvet. The annual winter recital was the biggest night of the year for this prestigious school, and the tension in the air was palpable. Parents sat in rows of stiff chairs, fanning themselves with glossy programs, their eyes fixed on the stage. They weren't just there to watch their children play. They were there to judge. For many of them, this was a competition. They wanted to see whose child was the best, whose family had the most status, and who had spent the most money on lessons. In the far corner of the waiting room, away from the clusters of proud mothers and fathers, sat a little girl named Maya. She was only 7 years old, small for her age, with shy eyes that seemed to be constantly looking at the floor. She was wearing a simple blue dress that her mother had carefully ironed that morning. It wasn't a fancy dress like some of the other girls were wearing, no frills, no sequins, but it was neat and clean. Maya was holding her sheet music with both hands, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was terrified. Maya was not the kind of child who demanded attention. She was quiet, hardworking, and incredibly humble. She practiced the piano every single day after school, sometimes for hours, because she loved the way the music sounded. She loved how hitting the right keys could make a feeling, a story, come out of the silence. But tonight, looking at the big stage through the crack in the curtain, she felt like she didn't belong. The other students were talking loudly, laughing, and showing off. Maya just sat there, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. Her teacher, Mr. Roy, was standing near the entrance to the stage. He was a tall man with a stiff posture and a face that rarely smiled. Mr. Roy believed he was the best music teacher in the city, perhaps even the country. He believed that talent was something you were born with, something that couldn't be taught. He often looked down on students who had to work hard to learn a piece. To him, if you had to struggle, you weren't a true artist. As he watched his students perform one by one, his irritation grew. The music was fine, technically correct, but it was boring. It wasn't the spectacle he wanted. He wanted to impress the wealthy donors sitting in the front row. He wanted to prove that his teaching methods produced prodigies, not just average children. Mr. Roy's eyes scanned the room and landed on Maya. He let out a small, annoyed sigh. He had never liked Maya. She was too timid, too ordinary. She always played the songs he gave her, but she never played them with the arrogance and flashiness that he admired. To him, she was a waste of a spot in the recital. He decided right then that he needed to do something to make the night more interesting. He needed a lesson, a harsh object lesson, about what real talent looked like. He walked over to Maya, his footsteps heavy and sharp on the wooden floor. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with fear. She knew Mr. Roy was strict, and she was terrified of disappointing him. "Are you ready, Maya?" Mr. Roy asked. His voice was cold, lacking any warmth. "Yes, sir," Maya whispered softly. "I practiced the minuet a lot. I think I can do it." Mr. Roy didn't smile. Instead, he leaned down closer to her face. He could smell her nervousness, and it seemed to fuel his cruelty. "The minuet is too easy for you, Maya. It's boring. It's putting the audience to sleep. We need to show them something more." Maya looked confused. But that's what is on the program, sir. That's what my parents are expecting." "Forget the program," Mr. Roy snapped. He reached into his leather folder and pulled out a different stack of papers. It was much thicker than the music she had practiced. "I have decided to change your piece. This is a test, Maya. If you are truly my student, you should be able to handle this." He shoved the papers into her hands. Maya looked down at the music and felt her stomach drop. The notes were crowded together on the page. There were sharps and flats everywhere, and the rhythms looked incredibly complicated. She recognized it immediately. It was a piece that the advanced students, the teenagers, played. It was way above her level. She didn't understand it. "I can't play this, sir," Maya stammered, her voice shaking. "I've never seen this before. I don't know these notes." Mr. Roy stood up straight, looking down at her with a look of disdain. "You will play it," he said firmly. or you will walk off that stage and admit that you are not good enough. The audience does not want mediocrity. They want brilliance. If you cannot give them brilliance, you should not be up there. He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to prove a point that hard work wasn't enough. He wanted her to fail so he could turn to the audience and say, "You see? This is what happens when we don't have natural talent." It was a power play, a cruel game for his own ego. "Now go," Mr. Roy ordered, stepping back. "And remember, don't disappoint me." Maya wanted to cry. She wanted to run to her mother and hide. But she could hear the announcer speaking through the loudspeakers. The previous student had finished. The polite applause was dying down. It was her turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the hall. "Next, we have a special performance. Please welcome Maya." The clapping was polite but sparse. Most people were busy whispering to their neighbors or checking their watches. Maya stood up. Her legs felt like they were made of lead. She took a deep breath, trying to stop the tears from falling. She held the impossible sheet music in her hands like a shield. She walked through the heavy curtains and out into the bright lights of the stage. The lights were blinding. She couldn't see the audience clearly, only a blur of faces in the darkness. She could hear the rustle of clothes, the sound of someone coughing, and the low murmur of conversation. The room felt enormous. The grand piano in the center of the stage looked huge and imposing, like a sleeping beast. Maya walked toward it, her sneakers making no sound on the carpet. She sat down on the bench. It was too high for her, so she had to stretch to reach the pedals. She adjusted the music stand and placed the sheet music Mr. Roy had given her in front of her. She stared at the pages. The notes seemed to mock her, dancing around in a language she couldn't speak, in the wings. Just off to the side of the stage, Mr. Roy stood in the shadows. He had his arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He was waiting for the meltdown. He expected her to sit there for a minute, realize she couldn't do it, and maybe even start crying. Then she would have to walk off the stage in shame. He was ready to enjoy every second of it. But then, something changed in Maya. She sat there for a long time. The silence in the hall stretched out. People started to whisper. Why isn't she playing? Is she stuck? Is this part of the act? Maya heard the whispers. She felt the pressure. She knew Mr. Roy was watching her, waiting for her to fail. A sudden spark of anger lit up inside her small chest. It was a tiny flame, but it was strong. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of being looked down on. She decided that she was not going to run away. She looked at the music again. She couldn't read the notes fast enough to play them perfectly, but she recognized the melody. She had heard one of the older students playing this song once, months ago. It was a difficult, fast-paced piece, full of anger and power. She didn't know the exact notes, but she remembered the sound. Maya closed her eyes. She blocked out the audience. She blocked out Mr. Roy. She focused only on the memory of that melody. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the dusty air of the auditorium. She placed her small, pale hands on the cool ivory keys. Mr. Roy uncrossed his arms. He leaned forward, frowning. Why wasn't she leaving? What was she doing? Suddenly, Maya lifted her hands. She didn't play the simple, pretty tune she had practiced. She struck the keys with a force that surprised everyone in the room. The first chord rang out loud and clear, crashing through the silence like a thunderclap. It wasn't the minuet. It was the song Mr. Roy had given her, the impossible song. And she wasn't reading it. She was playing from memory, playing with a raw, instinctive talent that no one, not even Mr. Roy, knew she had. She was improvising, finding her way through the complexity with an ear that was pitch perfect. The audience gasped. The whispers stopped instantly. All heads turned toward the stage. Mr. Roy's jaw dropped. The trap he had set had failed, and now he was the one in trouble. The sound that exploded from the piano wasn't the gentle, tentative plinking of a child learning an instrument. It was a roar. The first chord Maya struck was so powerful that it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and up the legs of the chairs where the audience sat. People who were busy checking their phones or whispering to their neighbors froze mid-sentence. Their heads snapped toward the stage, eyes wide with shock. That sound didn't belong to a shy 7-year-old girl. It belonged to a master. Maya's hands didn't stop. As soon as the first chord faded, her fingers were racing across the keys. The music was fast, incredibly fast. It was a storm of notes, cascading down the keyboard like heavy rain. The piece Mr. Roy had given her was meant to be played with aggression, with anger, but Maya was playing it with something else. She was playing with a fierce, intense joy. She wasn't just hitting the notes. She was chasing them. Her small hands moved with a blur of motion, jumping from the low end of the piano to the high end, crossing over one another in complex patterns that should have been impossible for someone with such small fingers in the wings. The color drained from Mr. Roy's face. He took a step forward, his mouth hanging open slightly. He knew this piece. He knew every measure of it, every difficult transition, every trap that composers put in to test a pianist's skill. He had given it to her, expecting her to crash and burn within 10 seconds. But she wasn't crashing. She wasn't missing a single note. He watched her hands, trying to find a mistake, trying to find a stumble that he could point to later and say, "See, she is imperfect." But there was nothing to find. Her technique was raw, perhaps not as polished as an adult's, but it was precise. She was finding the rhythm instinctively, feeling the pulse of the music in her chest rather than counting it out in her head. The audience was completely mesmerized. The heavy silence that had filled the room before was gone, replaced by a new kind of silence, the hushed, awed silence of people witnessing something extraordinary. A mother in the third row put her hand over her heart. A man in the front row, a wealthy donor who had looked bored all evening, sat up straighter, his glasses slipping down his nose as he leaned in to watch the small girl at the piano. They weren't just listening anymore. They were feeling the music. Maya was pouring all her fear, all her anxiety, and all her hidden strength into the keys. It was a performance that came straight from the soul, untouched by ego or showing off. As the song moved into its middle section, the tempo slowed down slightly. The music became softer, more melancholic. This was the hardest part of the piece. It required a delicate touch, a sensitivity that many adult pianists struggled to capture. Maya's hands slowed. She leaned closer to the keys, her fingers caressing the ivory rather than striking it. The notes floated out into the hall, hanging in the air like smoke. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. You could hear a pin drop. In this quiet moment, Maya looked peaceful. She wasn't the scared little girl who walked onto the stage a few minutes ago. She was a musician in her element, completely free. Mr. Roy felt a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He looked at the parents in the front row. They weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at the stage. He realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that his plan had completely backfired. He had tried to embarrass her, to use her as a prop to prove his own harsh standards. But instead, he had accidentally created a moment of magic. If she finished this piece successfully, she wouldn't be the joke of the recital. She would be the star. And he would be the teacher who tried to humiliate a prodigy. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, feeling suddenly very small in the shadows. The music began to build again. The soft, sad notes started to get louder, faster. Maya's body began to sway with the rhythm. Her feet were finally reaching the pedals, stretching to press them down at the right moments to deepen the sound. The piano seemed to come alive under her hands. It was singing for her. The complexity of the song returned, with runs of notes that rushed up and down the scales like a roller coaster. The tension in the room rose with the music. People were leaning forward in their seats, holding their breath, without even realizing it. It felt like the whole world had narrowed down to that single spot on the stage. Maya's cheeks were flushed pink now. A strand of hair had come loose from her clip and was sticking to her forehead, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were closed, her face tilted slightly upward as if she could see the music she was making. She wasn't thinking about Mr. Roy anymore. She wasn't thinking about the audience. She was just letting the music flow through her. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, total freedom. All the times she had been told she was too quiet, too small, too ordinary, were being washed away by the sound of the piano. She was loud. She was big. She was extraordinary. The piece moved toward its finale. The notes became chaotic and powerful, crashing together in a whirlwind of sound. Maya's hands were flying so fast they were almost a blur. She was standing up slightly off the bench to put her whole body weight into the keys, driving the music forward with a relentless energy. The grand piano was shaking with the force of her playing. The sound filled every corner of the vast hall, bouncing off the high ceilings and the velvet curtains. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Mr. Roy closed his eyes for a moment. He couldn't watch. He knew what was coming. The end of the piece was a series of massive, thundering chords followed by a final, sharp note. He waited for the mistake. He waited for her to tire out, for her small hands to fail her. But the crash came, perfect and resonant. Maya slammed her hands down on the keys for the final chord. And then, just as the sheet music demanded, she lifted her hands instantly, cutting the sound off into total silence. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was the silence of shock. The final note seemed to hang in the air, vibrating in everyone's ears. Maya sat there for a moment, her chest heaving, her hands resting on her knees. She slowly opened her eyes and looked out at the audience, the reality of where she was rushing back to her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the song began to fade, replaced by a sudden wave of shyness. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The audience was stunned. They had come expecting a cute, perhaps clumsy performance by a child. They had been prepared to smile politely even if she made mistakes. But no one was prepared for what they had just heard. It was the kind of performance that reminded people why they loved music in the first place. It wasn't about technique or status. It was about the raw, unfiltered expression of human emotion. Then a sound broke the silence. It was a single clap from the back of the room. Then another. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire hall erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar. People jumped to their feet. The man in the front row was clapping so hard his hands were red. The mother who had covered her heart was wiping away a tear. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls and filling the stage. It was a wave of sound that washed over Maya. Warming her face, Maya sat frozen on the bench for a moment, blinking in the bright lights. She couldn't believe the noise was for her. She looked toward the wings, searching for her teacher. She wanted to know if she was in trouble for playing the wrong song, for playing the song he had given her to fail. She saw Mr. Roy standing in the shadows, but he didn't look angry anymore. He looked pale and shaken. He couldn't meet her eyes. He turned his back to her, disappearing into the darkness backstage. Slowly, awkwardly, Maya stood up. She smoothed down her blue dress and gave a shy little curtsy. She didn't know how to accept this kind of praise. She didn't know how to take a bow. She just wanted to find her mom. As she turned to walk off the stage, the applause grew even louder. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" A few girls from her class who had ignored her all year were staring at her with open mouths, filled with a new kind of respect. As she walked past the heavy curtains, the lights of the stage dimmed behind her. The adrenaline finally left her legs, and they felt shaky and weak. Backstage, it was quiet compared to the roar of the auditorium. The other students waiting to perform looked at her differently now. They didn't see the quiet girl who always sat in the corner anymore. They saw the girl who had owned the stage. Maya found her mother waiting by the door. Her mother was crying, but she was smiling, a huge, proud smile. She scooped Maya up into a tight hug. "You were amazing," she whispered into Maya's hair. "I have never heard anything like that." "I was scared," Maya whispered back, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "He gave me hard music. He wanted me to mess up." "I know," her mother said, holding her tighter. "But you showed him. You showed everyone." Mr. Roy was nowhere to be seen. He had slipped away, unable to face the crowd or the little girl he had tried to humiliate. He had tried to break her spirit, thinking it was made of glass. But he had been wrong. Maya's spirit was made of steel, and tonight she had used it to make beautiful music. As Maya rested her head on her mother's shoulder, listening to the continued applause from the other side of the curtain, she knew that things were going to be different from now on. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a pianist, and she was unforgettable. The recital was not technically over, but for everyone in the hall, the real show had already ended. The atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted completely. Before Maya's performance, the event had been a pleasant, obligatory social gathering for the wealthy parents, a place to see and be seen. Now, it felt like a religious experience. The air was charged with electricity. As the next student walked onto the stage, a tall boy in a stiff suit, the audience didn't settle back into their polite whispers. Instead, a low murmur rippled through the rows. People were turned around in their seats, talking to their neighbors, their eyes wide with excitement. They weren't discussing the boy who was about to play. They were dissecting what they had just witnessed. The poor boy on stage played his piece perfectly. He hit every note with the precision of a machine, just as his teacher, Mr. Roy, had taught him. But compared to the raw, stormy emotion of Maya's performance, the boy's music felt flat. It felt like reading a dictionary after reading a beautiful poem. The applause he received was polite, but it was thin. It was the kind of applause people give when they are thinking about something else. The magic of the night had been stolen, and everyone knew it. The bar had been set so high by a 7-year-old girl that the rest of the students couldn't help but feel inadequate by comparison. Backstage, the atmosphere was even stranger. The other students, who had previously treated Maya like she was invisible, were now looking at her with a mixture of awe and jealousy. They couldn't understand how the quiet girl who always sat in the corner had just pulled off the performance of a lifetime. Maya, however, was oblivious to the social dynamics shifting around her. She was sitting on a wooden chair near the water cooler, her hands wrapped around a small paper cup. She was trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. Her fingers, which had flown across the keys with such power just moments ago, were now cold and clumsy. Her mother knelt in front of her, rubbing Maya's arms to warm her up. "You are okay, my love," she kept whispering. "You were so brave." "I just wanted to make the sound stop," Maya admitted softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the next student playing. "I was so scared he would yell at me." Meanwhile, Mr. Roy was standing in the shadows of the far corner of the backstage area. He was hiding behind a large potted fern, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was furious, terrified, and confused. His plan had failed so spectacularly that he was having trouble processing it. He watched Maya sitting there, small and shivering, and felt a surge of irrational anger. How dare she? How dare she make him look like a fool? He had given her an impossible task to destroy her confidence, and instead, she had used it to make herself a legend. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. He needed to fix this. He needed to regain control of the narrative before the night ended, as the recital dragged on. The parents in the lobby began to gather in clusters. The word was spreading like wildfire. People were pulling out their phones, checking for recordings. One of the fathers, a wealthy businessman who usually ignored the other parents, was holding his phone up to a group of mothers. "I got the whole thing," he was saying, his voice hushed with excitement. "Listen to this transition. It's incredible. I've never heard a child play with that kind of feeling." A woman in a fur coat shook her head in disbelief. "And to think she's in Mr. Roy's class? He always talks about how strict he is, how he only accepts the best. I suppose he was right about her talent, but why did he keep her hidden? Why wasn't she the opening act?" Mr. Roy stepped out from the shadows to head toward the lobby, hoping to mingle and smooth things over, to act as if he had planned this masterpiece all along. But as he walked into the crowded lobby, the conversation stopped. It wasn't a sudden, awkward silence, but a shift in tone. People turned to look at him. Usually, they looked at him with respect, treating him like the gatekeeper of high art. Tonight, their eyes were searching, critical. They were wondering if the cruelty they had sensed in him was real. "Mr. Roy," the businessman with the phone called out, waving him over. "Incredible work with the little girl. Truly, what a method you have. Giving her that advanced piece. Was it a gamble? Or did you know she could do it?" Mr. Roy froze. This was his chance. He could lie. He could smile and say, "Of course I knew. I have been training her in secret." He could steal the credit. He opened his mouth, the lie forming on his tongue. But he looked at the man's face, and then at the other parents watching him. He saw that they didn't believe his usual arrogance anymore. They had seen Maya's face. They had seen the terror before she played. They knew he hadn't prepared her for that. It was a test of her character, Mr. Roy stammered, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. I wanted to see if she had the grit to perform under pressure. A mother near the back crossed her arms. She looked terrified, Mr. Roy. It didn't look like a teaching moment. It looked like you set her up to fail. The accusation hung in the air. Mr. Roy's face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with his dark suit. I do not need to explain my teaching methods to you, he snapped, his temper flaring. Talent requires pressure. Diamonds are made under weight. But you didn't make the diamond, the businessman said calmly, putting his phone back in his pocket. She did that despite you, not because of you. We all saw the sheet music, Roy. It was a change from the program. You tried to embarrass a child. That isn't teaching. That's bullying. The murmurs of agreement from the other parents were like knives to Mr. Roy's pride. He realized then that his reputation was crumbling. These were the people who paid his salary, who sent their children to his academy. If they turned on him, he was finished. He spun around on his heel and marched back toward the refreshments table, pouring himself a cup of water with a shaking hand. He watched the door to the backstage area, waiting for Maya and her mother to emerge. He knew he had to talk to them, to somehow intimidate them into silence, or perhaps to convince them that he was on their side. He didn't know which, but he knew he couldn't let them leave without saying something. Inside the auditorium, the final student finished, and the director of the academy walked onto the stage to give the closing remarks. But nobody was listening. As soon as he said thank you, the crowd began to stand up immediately. Usually, parents would linger to chat or network. Tonight, they were heading straight for the exit. They wanted to get home and tell their friends about what they had seen. They wanted to post the videos online. The narrative was already spinning out of Mr. Roy's control. Backstage, Maya and her mother were packing up her music bag. Maya's simple sheet music for the minuet was buried at the bottom, forgotten. On top was the complex, terrifying score Mr. Roy had given her. Maya looked at the papers for a moment. She didn't hate the music. In fact, looking at it now, it didn't seem as scary as it had before. She had conquered it. She had tamed the monster. Are you ready to go, sweetie? Her mother asked, slipping Maya's coat over her shoulders. Your father is waiting in the car. Maya nodded. Yes, can we get ice cream? Her mother laughed, a sound full of relief. We can get all the ice cream you want. They walked toward the side exit that led to the parking lot, hoping to avoid the crowd. But as they pushed open the heavy metal door, they found Mr. Roy blocking their path. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened and his hair was slightly messy. He stepped in front of them, forcing them to stop. Maya, he said, his voice tight. That was quite a performance. Thank you, Mr. Roy, Maya said politely, but she moved closer to her mother's leg, holding her hand tight. Mr. Roy looked at the mother, his eyes pleading. I knew she had it in her, he said quickly. I wanted to challenge her. You see, she has raw talent, but she needs discipline. I did that to show her what she is capable of. We need to discuss her future lessons immediately. I have a plan for a competition in the spring. She could win, but she needs me. Without my guidance, she will just be a novelty act. Maya's mother looked at the teacher. She had always been intimidated by him, by his title and his cold demeanor. But tonight, holding her daughter's hand, she felt something different. She felt strength. She remembered the look on her daughter's face when Mr. Roy handed her the impossible music. She remembered the fear, and she remembered how Maya had overcome it, not because of him, but in spite of him. No, Maya's mother said simply. Her voice was quiet, but it was firm. Mr. Roy blinked, confused. No, what do you mean, no? This is her career we are talking about. I am the best teacher in the city. People wait years to get on my roster. I mean, no, she repeated, looking him straight in the eye. You didn't do that to teach her. You did that to hurt her. We saw it. The audience saw it. You didn't expect her to succeed, and that is the problem. A teacher should believe in their students, even when they are small and quiet. You don't believe in anything but yourself. She played my piece, Mr. Roy hissed, getting angry. She played what I gave her. She played what was in her heart, Maya's mother corrected him. And she won't be coming back to your class. We will find a teacher who sees her, not one who wants to use her. Before Mr. Roy could argue, Maya pulled on her mother's hand. Mommy, I'm cold, she whispered. The sun hadn't even fully risen over the city, but the phone lines at the prestigious music academy were already burning hot. Usually Monday mornings were slow. The receptionist would arrive, turn on the coffee pot in the break room, maybe answer a few emails about tuition payments or upcoming holidays. But this Monday was different. The academy was under siege, not by angry protesters or police, but by the relentless ringing of telephones and the chiming of emails hitting the inbox. The quiet, dusty hallways that usually smelled of floor wax and old paper were buzzing with an energy that felt like electricity. By the time Mr. Roy walked through the front doors at 8 a.m., carrying his usual leather briefcase and wearing his usual stern expression, the video of Maya had already been viewed 50,000 times. In the modern world, true talent doesn't stay hidden for long. Someone in the audience on that frosty night had recorded the whole thing on their phone. They had captured Maya's terrified face as she sat down, the impossible sheet music that looked like black ants swarming on the paper, and then the explosive, soul-shaking performance that followed. The video included the moment the silence broke, the gasps of the crowd, and the thunderous standing ovation. But perhaps most damaging of all, the video showed Mr. Roy. It showed him standing in the wings with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face, and then later, it caught the exact moment his face went pale and he shrunk back into the shadows. The title of the video was simple but devastating. Arrogant teacher tries to fail shy student. She plays like a master. Mr. Roy walked into his private studio. Hanging his coat on the rack, without noticing that the building felt different, it felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted, or perhaps a storm was brewing. He sat at his desk and opened his planner. He was ready to continue his work, to continue his reign as the king of music education in the city. He told himself that the reaction in the lobby the night before was just a fluke, a moment of hysteria from uneducated parents. He believed that by Monday, things would calm down. But 10 minutes later, the door to his office flew open. It wasn't a student. It was the director of the academy, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was usually a calm man, a bureaucrat who loved paperwork and organization. Today, his tie was loose, his hair was messy, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk, Roy," Mr. Henderson said, closing the door firmly behind him. His voice wasn't polite. It was cold and hard. Mr. Roy frowned, adjusting his glasses. "I am preparing for my 9 a.m. student. Is there a problem with the schedule?" "The problem is you," Mr. Henderson said, slamming a stack of printed papers onto Mr. Roy's desk. It was a printout of social media comments, news articles, and emails. "Do you know how many phone calls I got this morning? Do you know how many emails are in the general inbox? We are being flooded." Mr. Roy looked at the papers, confused. "I assume they are calling about the prodigy." "Yes, it was quite a night. I always knew she had potential. I just needed to push her. It is my teaching method. Pressure makes diamonds." He tried to sound confident, to spin the story back in his favor. Mr. Henderson let out a short, humorless laugh. "They aren't calling to congratulate you, Roy. They are calling to ask why you humiliated a 7-year-old child. I've had 3 parents pull their children out of your class this morning alone. 3, and it's only 8:30 a.m. They are scared you will do the same to them. One mother said she doesn't want her son learning music from a man who enjoys crushing spirits. She said you were a bully." This hit Mr. Roy harder than he expected. His ego was his armor. He always told himself that his strictness was necessary, the parents were too soft, and that children needed to be forced to be great. He believed he was the only one who understood the price of perfection. But to hear that he was losing his power, his livelihood, because of a little girl, it made him burn with frustration. "They're weak," Mr. Roy snapped, standing up. "Music is hard. It is discipline. If they can't handle a little pressure, they should go play soccer in the park. I am an artist. I am a teacher of the elite. You are a liability, Mr. Henderson said quietly. Look at the comments, Roy. Read them. The public doesn't see a strict teacher. They see a cruel man who tried to destroy a child's dream. In the video shows everything. It shows your face. You didn't look like a teacher. You looked like you were hoping she would fail. Mr. Roy looked down at the papers on his desk. He read a few of the comments. That poor girl, he should be fired. Imagine trying to embarrass a kid like that. She is a hero. He is a zero. The words stung. They were like little needles pricking his skin. He realized then that the narrative had escaped him. He didn't control the story anymore. The world did. And the world had chosen Maya. Meanwhile, across town, in a small, cozy apartment that smelled of toast and fabric softener, Maya was waking up. The sunlight was streaming through her window, hitting the dusty upright piano in the corner of the living room. Usually, getting ready for school was a chore for Maya. She would drag her feet, trying to stay invisible in the classroom, trying not to speak unless spoken to. But today was different. The air around her felt different. Her mother came into the room smiling. She was holding her phone. "Good morning, Star," she said gently. "Did you sleep well?" Maya nodded, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "I had a dream I was flying," she said softly. Her mother laughed. "Maybe you were. You know, the video has almost 100,000 likes now." She showed the screen to Maya. It was a strange feeling for a 7-year-old to see numbers that big attached to her face. People love you, Maya. They love what you did. When Maya walked into her classroom that morning, the room went quiet. It wasn't the mean kind of quiet she was used to. It was a buzz of excitement. Kids who had never noticed her before, who only knew her as the quiet girl in the blue cardigan, were staring at her with wide eyes. "Did you really play that?" A boy named Leo asked from the back row. He was usually the class clown, but he looked serious now. "My dad showed me the video. He said you played better than the guy on the radio. You were epic." Maya didn't know what to say. She felt her cheeks get hot. She just nodded and walked to her desk. But for the first time in her life, she didn't shrink into her chair. She sat up straight. She could feel them looking at her, but she didn't feel like hiding. She felt strong. Mr. Roy had tried to make her feel small, but by surviving it, she had become big. That afternoon, instead of going back to the academy, Maya's mother took her to a different part of the city. They went to a quiet street lined with old oak trees. They walked up the steps of a yellow house and knocked on the door. It was opened by an older woman with silver hair and kind, crinkly eyes. Her name was Ms. Liu. She was a retired piano teacher who used to teach at the university, but now she just taught because she loved it. "Welcome," Miss Liu said, ushering them in. The house was warm and smelled like chamomile tea and old books. It was nothing like the cold, fancy academy. There were no trophies in glass cases. There were just plants, comfortable sofas, and a beautiful old piano in the living room. "I heard what happened," Ms. Liu said, pouring tea for Maya's mother, "and I saw the video. That man. He has no idea what music is for. Music is for the heart, not for the ego." Maya looked around the room. It felt safe. "Do I have to play scales?" she asked quietly. Ms. Liu smiled. "Only if you want to. Why don't you play whatever you are feeling right now?" Maya walked over to the piano. It wasn't a shiny grand piano like at the academy. It was an upright, and the keys were a little yellow with age. But when Maya pressed down on them, the sound was rich and warm, like a hug. She sat down and took a deep breath. She played the song from the recital, but this time she wasn't playing out of fear. She wasn't playing to prove a point. She was playing because she wanted to. She played the angry parts softly, and the soft parts with strength. Ms. Liu closed her eyes and listened. When Maya finished, the old woman didn't critique her hand position or her timing. She just walked over and put a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You have a voice, Maya," she said softly. "A very loud, beautiful voice. Never let anyone silence it again." Back at the academy, the days turned into a week. The hallway outside Mr. Roy's studio, which used to be bustling with students waiting for their lessons, was silent. The silence was deafening. The notice board, which used to be full of Mr. Roy's students winning competitions, was now bare. The director had removed his name from the master teacher's list on the website to try and calm the angry parents and stop the bad publicity. Mr. Roy spent his days sitting in his office, staring at the wall. He would look at the empty chair where Maya used to sit. He remembered the way she looked at him with those big, scared eyes. He remembered the cruel smile he wore when he gave her the impossible music. He thought if he just broke her enough, she would quit and he wouldn't have to deal with her mediocrity. He never realized that in breaking her, he was forging her into something stronger than steel. He had used a hammer to shape her, but she hadn't shattered. She had turned into a diamond. The final blow came on Friday afternoon. Mr. Roy was packing up his briefcase, getting ready to leave early because he had no students left to teach for the day.